Welcome everyone. Today I'm with Dr. Simon Moore of leading behavioural psychologist firm Innovation Bubble. Simon, can you tell us a little about your background and the type of work you do in customer experience?
So I'm Simon, and I lead a group of chartered psychologists. Never quite sure what you call a group of psychologists, really. Some people say psychosis, some people say an excitement. I prefer the positive. But we work in kind of a employee customer experience field, very much within the space of using psychology to investigate the kind of conscious, what people say, as opposed to the non-conscious, how people feel in terms of behavioural action or inaction. So, and there's a big difference between those two things. And typically people are much more geared up to measure the kind of conscious, what people say, and then act on that. And having kind of researched and worked in the commercial field for the last kind of 20 odd years, I'm very suspicious of using just that dimension, because I think what happens then is you build, I suppose, models of intervention on sand rather than kind of concrete. So, and this is why I feel companies are, constantly getting people in to redo research, the same research every year. It's because, they're not finding the answers that they need to find because they're not looking in the right areas. And so one of the areas that I think is really underutilized, and people talk about it often, but I think they really struggle with how to do this, because it is in the realm of psychology. So you do need psychologists to do this. Is in the area of kind of this, the impact of emotions on decision making, experience, and also behavioural change. How do we use that to actually enact change? And that's a crucial part that I think is often missed. So people often get insight reports on customer experience or employee experience, and at the end of it they get a 112-page report that lands on their desk, and that's probably where it stays, or if not, it might move to the shelf. So I don't think people necessarily know what to do with that information. So one of the things that we've been quite successfully doing is kind of providing those different dimensions of insight, so things that are really important in terms of changing behavior, understanding why people do or don't do things. So for example, if you talk about emotions, those people who are using emotions are still probably only using 20-30% of what they might kind of could deploy in this area. So typically when you talk about emotions, people think about individuals and their emotions. But there's a whole space about how people act or don't act based on other people's emotions. So if you think about employees, for example, there's a whole range of employees who will do stuff or not do stuff, not based on how they feel, but how it impacts on colleagues or dare I say, competitors at work. So that people will do things to annoy people, for example. It's not constructive, but they do it for a reason that drives them emotionally, and it might not be rational, but that's what we do. So I think that's an area that's often forgotten. Another area which we mentioned is, how do these things kind of, I suppose, prop up decision making? So how do they influence it? And what we know from decision making is that probably the vast minority of things are influenced by rational facts and figures and pragmatics and practicalities. The vast majority of kind of, I suppose, behavior is kind of motivated by what we call peripheral cues. So in terms of being persuaded to do or not do something, it's how people look, how they sound, how does it make me feel, what does it allow me not to do, what does it allow me to do. So very kind of, I suppose, artificial peripheral things. And I think these things are really underrated, but they're nevertheless quite essential to understand.
Yes.
And then we have the kind of whole interplay between, experience, emotion, and needs and motivation. And another area that we've kind of driven really and been quite successful in, I suppose, not pioneering, but kind of leading, is trying to be simplistic. And people are simplistic. So, a number of brands and companies and organizations I've chatted to who have these really kind of high kind of, heavenly visions of how to change stuff. And in actual fact, it's boiled down to very simple, basic needs that we need to address. Because at the end of the day, people are very lazy, and we don't like, you, me, everyone who's listening to this, don't like big changes. It costs a lot of energy, a lot of effort. And typically as humans, we don't like doing that. So we like things that allow us to do things or change easily. But more importantly, I think, and one of the big successes of what we've been doing is, how do we harness what people intuitively think or do at a subconscious level? Now, if we can tap into that,
yes,
if we can actually tap into this kind of, the gut feelings that actually drive people to do or not do things, we can harness that. And that is a very persuasive kind of area of psychology. It's natural. It's not artificial. So the number of people that, who've talked to me about behavioural intervention and, we got this 10-point plan. Well, I'm afraid you've gone wrong after you get to the point number 2. What we want is a 1-point plan, really. We need to find out what is actually going on there in the first place. So what are the intuitive things that are at play from people that we can use? Anything you create is artificial. Anything that is intuitively there is actually going to have an influence. So we need to think, how do we kind of move those to our, deploy them to our advantage? So we talk about, how do we turn the volume up on engagement?
Yes.
We're looking at intuitive engagement. And how do we turn the volume down on those things that would act as barriers? What we tend not to do is think about, in terms of behavior change, a whole kind of, staff manual of, you should be like this. And people will read that, and 99% of people will forget about that in the first kind of hour of reading it. So instead, what you should do is build up from the kind of basics. So rather than this kind of top-down notion of, these are our 10 mission statements, what we find works really well is, well, what are the things that work really well on the ground and that work really well intuitively with customers or employees? Those are your mission statements. Those are the things that are obviously working really well to drive experience in a positive way within your organization. So, those should be built into your mission statements, because these are the things that people are doing. Don't give them things that they're not doing, because that's more effort, it's hassle, I've got to learn these things, it's not natural. All these things are, counterproductive, because if we're literally just trying to copy something that someone tells us to do, let's say our line managers told us you need to do these 3 things. If they're not natural to us, there's a number of disadvantages. One, we have to learn them, and we might learn them in the wrong way. Secondly, what we know from persuasion is that something we don't actually intuitively believe in, we're not going to persuade other people to do. So we're much more persuasive when we actually believe in something and it's natural to us, because there's a natural kind of force there that allow, people are very good at actually decoding from a kind of non-verbal perspective. So, if you take adverts, for example, it always interests me that they, get these big celebrities to endorse things, when in actual fact, these celebrities, don't even care about the product. So, and that comes across. You can see that actually in the videos, that they are literally going through the motions. So that's not very persuasive. So why don't companies, for example, look at the kind of, the ethics and the kind of philosophy of the people that they might want to endorse their brands, and try and get a better fit? Because, they're not only going to be saying positive things verbally, but non-verbally, which is where the importance is, they're going to be much more persuasive as well. So yes, there's a very long, rambling explanation about the kind of areas that we get involved in.
But of course, a lot of the time, companies would say, we're not going to believe in this unless we can measure it. But you're talking a lot about the emotional and the subconscious, those gut reactions that people have, those peripheral clues, which is the term I liked. But so many companies would say, if we can't measure it, we can't action it. They rush straight to ROI. So how do you help those sort of very quantitative type of companies to appreciate emotions and the importance of emotions, both in the customer experience and, of course, as you raise, in the employee experience as well?
I think companies struggle in this because, as I alluded to at the beginning, they're not using the right kind of people to investigate this. And obviously emotions fall quite squarely within the realm of psychology, and obviously psychologists who are listening will know that they're trained in looking for these things. So there are, there are ways, and we've developed quantitative ways to measure emotions at both at the conscious and subconscious level. And there are two methods, and I think people will probably relate to the fact when I talk about there's, that qualitative and quantitative should be the same.
Yes.
They should be in bed together, basically. And the way that we deploy things is that they're not kind of either or. That they are part of the same process, and if you do it that way, you're going to be much more assured that you can, measure emotions and you can do something with them. So for example, we would do lots of qualitative. So we would do things like psychology interviews, we do focus groups, that kind of stuff. But it's not just, we don't go in with a list of questions. We're looking for the narratives that people come out with. And we call this cognitive salience interviewing. So we allow people to start talking about where they want to talk about, for example. So at what point and where do they begin their story? Because they give us clues about what's emotionally important to them. So there is this kind of narrative, semiotic, semantic kind of, I suppose, exploration. And then we look for, tone of voice, pauses, non-verbal behavior, facial expression, and given we're psychologists, we're trained to look for that as well. They give us clues about whether someone, is being honest or being defensive or actually believing in what they're saying. So this is an exploration stage, and we call this people landscaping. So Innovation Bubble, we call this people. So we're looking to see, are our assumptions correct? Have we missed anything from an emotional perspective? Because often that's the case. So they give us clues. So we don't stop there. That's the first process. So that's the very qualitative. So that phase allows us to pin down what emotions are important here, both from a positive and a negative point of view. So what emotions are there potentially to increase positive kind of customer or employee experience, and what emotions are there that are detracting from it. So we have them pinned down at that stage. So then what we can do is, from a quantitative perspective, we can then measure the prevalence of those emotions. So in a segment group, in a market, how many people express those attitudes or emotions. But most importantly, it's how strong are they? So how influential are they in driving that customer experience? Now, we've developed a tool that we call Emotics that is kind of based somewhat on the Harvard implicit association testing. But the last 3 years, we've kind of taken that forward somewhat and refined it, and particularly looked at employee and customer experience with it. And it's statistically modeled. So it allows us to statistically predict, how influential are the things that pop out from this. And the other thing that it does is actually it differentiates from the conscious what people are telling us, from the subconscious what people are actually feeling. It's a really nice model to actually give us another dimension to almost question statistically whether the answer that someone's giving you, is that accurate, or would we be somewhat suspicious? But also, are there other things that we haven't asked? That's the trouble with questioning. If you don't ask the right questions, and you're not going to get the right answers. So this allows us, so that's what we ask people to talk, really, because they give us clues where they want their conversation. So, and then when you combine the two up, it's quite interesting because you have a complete model then of measurement. So you know what emotions are at play. We know how, to what extent is the audience talking about or using these emotions. So is it half the audience? Is it a particular segment of the audience? Then what we can do is we can statistically, predict how influential are those things. So, if it's irritation or it's kind of pleasure, to what extent are they kind of driving that customer experience? And it's worked very well across a number of sectors. So we've had some really nice feedback about, the output from that, and the fact that we had one client that actually said, we've spent 15 years trying to nail this and you've done it in a week, which is actually quite a nice feedback to get. So I think, as psychologists, we do take a lot for granted of what we know. And I often kind of sit back in meetings to think, well, I shouldn't kind of overestimate what I know, because these people aren't psychologists, so we kind of bring a different kind of slant on things. But it's actually quite nice to sit down and say, right, so these emotions are irrelevant, but these ones are really what driving your experience, and we can do that by kind of region, we can do that by gender, age group, which is actually quite interesting. So we can say, the emotions in, the east of Scotland are this, what are driving your product experience, whereas those in southwest England are completely different.
Very good. And that is a key thing in customer experience, about unpicking that emotion, that subconscious response. I think that's why that's really important, and increasingly so also for employees. But I also noticed, Simon, that you're doing a little bit of work in the pharmaceutical with a company called ID. Do you just want to give a little explanation of that for the audience?
Yeah, so we partnered up with a company called Idea Pharma, who work very much within, as you alluded to, the kind of pharmaceutical space. And what we do for them is the kind of same thing we do for customer and employee experience, but we're looking at, so two things really:
Yes.
Patient experience.
Yes.
Again, very much built on kind of non-rational emotional kind of output, and how do we measure that? So, how do patients kind of engage or not engage with communication about their health or their medication? Why do they do or not kind of take, I suppose, comply
Yes.
with their medical regimes? Because a lot of them don't. Why do some people not even present themselves when they know that kind of they've got medical issues? So this whole thing, how does identity fit into that? How does their standing within their social group kind of affect their health behaviour? That's all really fascinating stuff. But also what we do, we actually look, and this is really interesting for a lot of the pharma
Yes.
people, and I suppose this is also kind of taps onto our consumer experience, is looking at products. So, for example, if you look at pharma, why do physicians and consultants prescribe or not prescribe certain drugs, for example? What's going on there? And we've done some quite fascinating work in that space of looking at, what are the factors that increase or decrease the likelihood that they will kind of, entertain a product? How does that square with, work with colleagues or their kind of environment, whether they're working alone or with a kind of in a specialist unit? How does that, interact with patient experience? Quite complex, but it's actually quite fascinating. There's so much psychology there that's
Absolutely.
really relevant.
Good. So, Simon, we could almost say you're a lie detector, uncovering what people don't say or how they feel. In terms of,
I think it helps. Yeah, in that space, I think it helps that it's like most psychologists are quite nosy.
Absolutely.
So we're I suppose we have a license to be nosy, and it's quite nice because we got a number of unique, I think,
absolutely,
skills that we can deploy that are actually quite useful in the consumer and employee space.
Okay, Simon. Well, thank you very much for your time. Just one final question: if people want to contact you, can you maybe just give your email or details?
Yeah, so they can have a look on our site, which is innovationbubble.eu, or they can email me. I don't know why, but I seem to have a very generic email, which is innovationbubble@gmail.com. Everyone else has got a named email, so I should look into that, shouldn't I? They can email me there, and they can find out, obviously, the things we've been getting up to. So we've got some case studies on there. We've just actually won an award as well for some of the stuff we've done. So we won the first Gold Standard Nudge Award for our work with behavioural change and customer experience in retail.
Very good.
So so it's very interesting. We did all our stuff, gave loads of insight, and then actually enacted sort of change both within customer experience, but also within the product engagement,
yes.
Which is really interesting. So, we just learned we won an award for that, so that's great.
I think that was awarded by Professor Daniel Kahneman, so it's quite a heavy-hitting award, I think.
Yes, he actually presented it personally, which I've already met him once, so we'll actually send one of the other team to
very good.
go and meet. But that was very nice.
Okay, well, Simon, very many thanks for your time, and appreciate listening to more of your talk, perhaps at another time as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.